Joining us today on a special episode of the Jesus Famous podcast with Pastor Nate Holdridge. Today we have a special guest in the studio sharing their story about how Jesus has changed their life. Join us as we discuss stories and discover how Jesus is famous and the testimonies of those around us.
All right, hey everyone. Thanks for listening to the Jesus Famous podcast. Today we got a special episode. I'm Nate Holdridge, pastor at Calvary Monterey, and I'm with Pastor Matt Kehler, one of the assistant pastors here at Calvary Monterey. And we're going to be talking with Pastor Matt about his living with cystic fibrosis. Matt just recently turned 40 years old, which is a big deal for any man, but is a big deal for someone living with CF. And so we're going to talk about what it's been like to have that diagnosis and deal with that condition, what it's been like to be married and have a family, and how he's currently doing, as well as thinking about how to minister to people who have significant trials in their lives that will perhaps even stay with them for the entirety of their lives, barring God's intervention directly in the form of a miracle or something like that. But Matt, it's great to have you here today. Thanks for hanging out.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
So before we really get into it, you are an assistant coach right now.
This is true.
Both of your sons or just your older son?
Just my oldest, my 8-year-old. Okay. Yeah.
So assistant coach for a local baseball team. Mm-hmm. And you recently told me that the head coach made an interesting decision. I was hoping you could let us all in on what that decision was.
Yeah, it's a good way to start this out, just to get it out there. So, it was the day that we were taking team pictures, and actually it was a day before, and the head coach sent a text to me and the other assistant coach and just said, "Hey, just want to let you guys know, I would like all of the coaches to come dressed in white baseball pants, black belt, tucked in shirt. See you there." And, I shared the text with my wife and said, "Well, babe, I'm pretty sure this is just for pictures. He probably just wants us to look good for pictures."
Keep the receipts on. Keep the receipt. Keep the tags on.
Totally. Yeah. So, ran a Big Five, grabbed some baseball pants. I didn't have any baseball pants on hand, oddly enough, so I had to go get some. Showed up to pictures and just waiting for our turn. I was standing by our head coach, and I just thought I better just make sure that this is just kind of a picture thing. So I just kind of leaned over and I was like, "Hey, so we're taking pictures, but for games, are you wanting us to dress out for games?" And he just kind of keeps his head forward and just shakes his head, "Yes."
Oh yeah, got a serious man there.
Serious man. So
I like it.
Yeah, been dressing out for every game, coming with my baseball pants and my shirt tucked in.
Has it been working? Has the intimidation factor really kind of affected the other coaching staffs, you think?
Yeah, I think out of the 10 games we've played, we've won 2 so far.
Okay,
so
well, hey, it might be that you would have been 0-10 and not 2-8.
I'm thinking it may have been, a winless season, except were it not for those baseball pants.
Well, I got the opportunity recently to go watch your son play a game, and it was enjoyable seeing you in your white baseball pants, Pastor Matt. Hey, man, I was thinking about this episode and talking about this, and first of all, I really appreciate that you're willing to talk about it. It's personal to you,
Sure.
Obviously. It's a personal part of your life, but I've really appreciated over the years how you have, at least here at Calvary Monterey, been willing to talk about it publicly, share this part of your life. It's been helpful. I think also necessary, because I think, you came here, you were still in your early 30s, and now as a 40-year-old man, we weren't all that certain how CF was going to impact your health while you were serving here. So it was kind of good to be like hey, full disclosure, there might be times I need to take care of my body in ways that are different from other guys on the staff. So I've really appreciated this. But for those who don't know what CF is, I'm going to have you talk about it in a second. But I was looking up cystic fibrosis on the Mayo Clinic website.
Oh, yeah.
And there's this one line. It says, although cystic fibrosis is progressive and requires daily care, people with CF are usually able to attend school and work. They often have a better quality of life than people with CF had in previous decades. Improvements in screening and treatments mean that people with CF now may live into their mid to late 30s or 40s, and some are living into their 50s. And it was that last line that really caught my attention. Of course, is not new information to me, but when you read that in black and white on a respectable medical journal website like that, it really settles in. Like, this is a serious thing. And so I'm curious if you could just first describe for all of us, what is cystic fibrosis?
Yeah, totally. So it's like the website said, it's a progressive disease. It's a genetic disease. So both parents need to have the defective gene, and then there's a 1 in 4 chance that their children will get CF. And it really kind of the causes of CF are ongoing lung infections, decreases the body's ability to breathe well over time, and that's why it is life shortening, quite honestly. So the goal is to keep your lungs as healthy and as clear from infection as possible. So even a minor cold can turn into way more for a CFer. So we were doing COVID protocols before COVID, was a thing. Yeah. And, we were keeping 6 feet distance from people that were sick, before the pandemic and all those things. But, the lungs, the digestive system, the sinuses, your body, because of a defect in the genetic code, it produces a thick, sticky mucus that just causes problems, right? So bacteria, a certain amount of mucus is good in the lungs, but a lot of it causes bacteria to get stuck, which then kind of breeds infection. And then infection over time will just continue to damage the lungs, deteriorate the lung quality. So just one of those things that, you've really got to kind of fight and do a lot of preventative work to stay as healthy as you can. So, yeah, for me, I'm, kind of taken medication since I was a kid, lots of doctor's appointments, taking pills every time I eat. Those are some of the common things that I have to do. Breathing treatments growing up, trying to keep things clear. And so, yeah, that's a little bit of what CF is, but you're right in that, man, that the marker for kind of life expectancy keeps getting further out, which is really encouraging.
Yeah, that's a blessing, of course, to you, but to all of us who know you and love you, we're blessed by that. Now, you said that when the markers are there genetically, 1 in 4 of a couple's children could have CF. You weren't the only one of your parents' kids that had CF. So you had a sister who also had CF. Yeah. My sister, about 3 years younger than me, she had CF as well. And so growing up, there was definitely a connection there that we kind of battled a lot of the same things and went through the same things and saw the same doctors. And so her CF, and they don't really know why certain siblings are affected more than others. They've done studies on it, still kind of inconclusive. But for whatever reason, my lungs were always healthier than my sister's. Her lung function was a good 20-30% lower than mine was. And that was just kind of the way it was growing up. And it wasn't because I was extra disciplined on my treatments or things like that, but yeah, she definitely had it harder. Same environment. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So describe for me, it sounds like early on in your childhood, you come to learn that you have cystic fibrosis. Your parents, I'm sure, and doctors are explaining it to you in an age-appropriate way. How young were you when you started being really conscious of this and that, there's things I have to do to take care of myself? And what was it like for you kind of going through those elementary, middle school, high school years with CF?
Yeah. I knew there was something different about my body early on, having to take pills, having 3 older siblings that didn't have CF and a younger sibling that did. my sister Hope, we're different. There's something about our bodies that just isn't working like everybody else. And I would ask questions of my parents, why do I have to take enzymes, these pills every time I eat? And, their responses were pretty simple. Well, your body doesn't work the same way as everybody else's. And, that was enough for me early on, that I just knew, okay, something's different. And, got sick more, had a lot of, I coughed, basically my whole life, had a cough my whole life. But it wasn't until middle school that I really started to understand my disease more. And it kind of corresponded with going to a new clinic where they really took a different approach, a more hands-on approach to managing my CF.
Okay. And
they kind of wanted to bring me in. I think they realized at that age, like, hey, he's got to start taking ownership of this thing. So that's really where it hit home. Now I'm reading for myself about CF. I'm understanding more the implications of this thing.
Kind of for the first time coming
really
to terms with life
yeah.
expectancy issues and things like that. Man, in middle school.
My parents made a decision early on that they were, for better or worse, they were going to kind of keep a lot of the details of my condition, kind of private from me even until I was a little bit older. So
yeah, probably wanted to just let you be a kid as much as possible without that weighing on you. And how is a child going to process that information? What a tough thing to handle as a parent. I mean, it's
so hard.
It's hard for a kid to understand what being 40 years old even is, let alone, well, that's your life expectancy or something like that. What a tough conversation.
Totally.
So unenviable position for them to be in.
So hard. Sure. Yeah. And I think their intentions were really good. They didn't want us to feel held back. They didn't want to limit us. And I think the condition, for parents that are trying to make that hard decision, do we inform our child about his or her situation? I think the condition dictates a lot of that too. Awareness is a big thing. So there's the argument against is, hey, the earlier the more that you're going to be able to develop habits and rhythms that can be so beneficial to your disease and managing your disease. And so, they decided if you're going to pick an age, there's not a lot happening in middle school, for a young kid.
Developmentally, it's really no big deal. It's you're just cruising.
It was like, okay, let's talk about this. I'm ready. So.
Oh, that's good. So before we go further, I didn't want to just keep building this up and, at the end talk about how you're doing today. I thought, let's just let everybody know how you're doing today.
Yeah.
There have been some advancements. I don't know how much you want to get into it, but at 40 years of age, you're in really good health for someone with CF, and we're all rejoicing about that. So I don't know how much you want to say on that subject, but I thought it'd be good for us to not leave a cliffhanger there, but just let people know you're actually doing really well.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be a bummer if we didn't get to that part. Dan runs out of tape or something. Yeah, so I'm doing really well. Nate, I'm feeling better at 40 than I've felt, I think, in the last decade or more.
Wow.
And I mean, God's grace, and I say God's grace because I really do give him, praise for it. And I believe his common grace seen in humanity through the advancements in science and medications. And about 7 years ago in the CF world, a new groundbreaking medication came out, the first of its kind. They call them CF modulators. They're the first to attack the underlying cause of CF, the defective, the mutated kind of protein that affects basically the development of mucus in your system. And so it's the first one to modulate that at the cellular level. How they're doing it, I don't understand the science or the biology, but man, since then they've come out with several iterations of these CF modulators. The one I'm currently on, and it's the one that they have touted as the miracle drug called Trikafta, has just been a game changer for my disease. I got on it 2 years ago, and coming out of a stay in the hospital, my worst bout with pneumonia, My worst kind of hospital stay as a result of my CF, and then a month later got on this Trikafta, and it's just been incredible. So the things that I've had to do just to maintain my lung function, I've been able just to kind of wean off because I don't need to do them anymore. My body's not producing the mucus that it was before. And so my doctors have just kind of said, like, yeah, you're having such an incredible response. You're not the only one. We're now rewriting the rules for CFers, essentially. So it's literally 2 pills in the morning and a pill at night,
Wow.
And by God's grace, it's been my body has just responded so well. So
What I want to know is, I know that those lung treatments would take like an hour.
yeah.
In the morning too, right? In the morning and night.
There were times where I would. I was on a nighttime regimen,
Okay.
but there were often times I had to
I
do
want to know what
both.
you're doing with that extra hour or two every day. I mean, you're all working here at the church. I'm expecting a little bit more productivity now.
Yeah, totally. And it's funny because part of the treatments, I had to wear this kind of vest that would shake my lungs and airway clearance. And so, yeah, you really couldn't have conversation, So there was a lot of that time. Me and my wife would watch something together, and we'd try to listen, maybe subtitles. Read. I would read during that time. I wish I could say I redeemed the time every moment, but that wouldn't be true.
Yeah. Well, if you could, I want to ask you some questions just about people's interactions with you over the years, and maybe best practices for ministering to someone who's got a permanent trial that they're dealing with that's kind of a fixture in their life. I'm sure you've had people succeed in ministering to you and fail in trying to minister to you. But before we get into that and kind of just bring it into some practical counsel for people, I'm curious also just how CF, for better or worse, has affected relationships that you have in life. I mean, you're a married man, you have 2 beautiful young boys, and are deeply embedded in the fabric of the church locally. People love you and care about you. I would imagine there's even some moments where relationships go a little bit deeper or are a little more important, or I've seen you and Bree really, prioritize your relationship together and your family because of perhaps a sense that time is precious and we don't want to take any moment for granted, and I think those are positive outcomes and reactions, So maybe a first question to ask you in this little category is, when you were in high school, did you ever use your illness as a way to get girls at all?
Oh man. I kind of had a strict no dating policy during high school. It was during the courtship era.
Goodbye.
I kissed dating goodbye. Yeah. I will say I may have used it for some sympathy, though. Definitely probably pulled that card a little bit. And
what self-respecting high school man would not do that?
Yeah.
There's got to be some benefit.
Gotta be. I know. I mean, the one thing in terms of benefits for CF, which this one is, part of the deal is the mucus that's kind of built up in your pancreas, which kind of blocks your enzymes from being able to absorb all the nutrients from your body, from your food. And so you kind of have to double up on your calories. So that's more of a physiological benefit. Relational benefits. I think what you described, Nate, is, you just put it so well, man, is that there was always this kind of sense, at least once I started to understand my situation and my body and my condition, that time is short. And, I think there was a sense I want to connect with people on a level that isn't superficial, or at least have those connections that are deeply meaningful, because there's a sense that I don't know how long the Lord has me around. And I also have to kind of understand, I believe that even though the question of why did this happen, I won't be able to answer this side of heaven. Why did God create my body this way to where my genetic code is affected, and this is my story? I don't know the why, but I know that I don't want to waste it. I don't want to waste this life. And I feel like if God can even use me in my situation, and even us in a small part, CF, to minister to someone else and to be an example, or gosh, maybe not an example, but even just another signpost to God's glory and God's goodness in the face of suffering, in the face of difficulty, man, I don't want to waste any of that. And so I feel like the Lord has allowed me to have conversations and build relationships that can quickly, I think, go into that more meaningful zone, just based on people knowing, hey, this is his lived reality, and to connect on a pretty cool level that way. So, and then of course my wife, she's really the star, I think, and probably deserves a podcast of her own, in that she chose to link her life with mine, knowing what she was signing up for, I didn't conceal the fact that I had CF, that wasn't possible. But so she fully knew marrying me was going to mean, at least she was going to have to be prepared for a level of suffering earlier on, probably than maybe the average spouse.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I fully agree with you that she deserves to have her own podcast. It remains to be seen whether I can get her to podcast with me.
This is true. Yeah.
But she is a gem. And I just love watching you guys in your relationship and your dynamic together. And working through some really serious things in your, early mid-20s when you guys first, got married and, started on this journey together. So what are some ways, do you ever kind of get to the point where you're like, I've thought a lot about my mortality, probably more than your average, guy in his 30s or now 40s.
Sure.
But I also just want to hang out. I don't want to always have everyone be so conscious of this thing that is looming in my life or something, hey, just treat me normally. I don't really want to go there right now.
I think I have felt that, not really with closer friendships, because, it's not something that I try to wear as, on my sleeve, like constantly, like, oh man, my CF. And because I'm healthy, I'm relative, even for a CFer, that's not been something that I think defines me, although it describes me. And so totally willing to talk about it at any time. I've never been opposed to that. But I think, there are times where it is like, hey, let's do this, live in life. There's so much good stuff that God is doing in life, and so many things for me to be thankful for that, I do try not to focus on what is not or what could be.
Yeah.
So,
and I'm sure people at times will react in kind of strange or jarring ways. I imagine, like, if, because you're right. Looking at you, of course, there's nothing that communicates, oh, I'm not well, I'm sick, you're a strapping young man.
Well, thank you.
Full of piss and vinegar, as they used to say.
That's right.
But, I'm sure that there are times where someone maybe that a little bit, or you're just getting to know, and as you're getting to know them, it comes out, I have cystic fibrosis, and for them, they're processing it for the very first time.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you get a lot of like, oh, I'm sorry. It's like they're going through the stages of grief right there in front of you. You're like, hey, I'm still here. I've been dealing with this. I'm good to go. Totally. So what are some like, not just counsel for people who, meet someone who has CF, but, I'm just thinking about, gosh, we meet people who have cancer, which has more of an immediacy to it, and just the C word is just so scary for us. Or, other illnesses that maybe aren't even life-shortening or life-threatening, but you're just living with them. It's not going anywhere, and it really kind of affects your, everyday life and experience. Right. What are some things you've picked up over the years that, like, gosh, this really works when you go this route, and this really doesn't work when you go this route?
Yeah. I think for people that deal with chronic illness, they've gone through those stages, and there's a sense where to us it's just very normal, and it's not something that we wake up having to accept over and over again. I mean, I'm maybe just speaking for myself, having kind of 18 months or 15 months diagnosed with CF, so it's just been my lived experience. And so for me, I think I understand people's kind of like, oh, wow, I did not realize that, especially with CF, because that's one of the things that they talk about in the CF community, is that from the outside, you wouldn't know that there's anything going on, but that it is a life-shortening illness. And then, the daily life, there's things about the daily life that can be challenging. But I would just say for people, I don't feel I've got so much support that the need to feel something for me, I don't need that, like, oh man, I am so sorry. Because for me it's I'm not sorry that God made me this way. There's been times in my life where I've had to surrender that to him and do some work with him, like, God, why? And this is hard. And, but man, I have accepted it and have looked to embody more like Romans 8:28, that, and we know all things work together for good to those that love God and are the called according to his purposes. So I know that there are things about my disease that are not good. And that verse isn't saying that CF is good, but it's saying that God promises to work good out of it. And so to maybe just, have as much as you can, not be shocked and, not think, oh man, now this changes our relationship, because it's just it describes me, but it doesn't define me.
Yeah.
So
that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, what are some of the ways that, over the years, I mean, you've known the Lord for a long time. You were raised in a Christian family. You've been walking with the Lord for a long time. And in those different stages of your life, those middle school years, high school years, young adult years, you're entering into middle age. What are some of the ways that God has ministered to you directly regarding your CF?
Yeah. Well, I think in the middle school, high school years, it really was this sense that 2 Corinthians 4, we don't look to what is seen. We look to what is unseen. What is seen is temporary. What is unseen is eternal. This real, I think, wrapping my heart and my mind around that as a Christian that goes through something difficult, we have resources and we have perspective that the secular worldview or perspective just cannot compare with. The idea that there is more after this life, that I understand the world as it is today is not the one that God originally created. That this wasn't his original plan for us and design, but there's a thing called sin that just has kind of wreaked havoc on our world. And so my body is not the best version that, it could be or whatever. And I think that's probably true of all of us, especially as we get older. And so I think those years was really about formulating a theology around difficulty, illness, suffering, and understanding even in the midst of it, like God's good. And I want other people to know that. And I've always just been kind of an optimistic person, glass half full kind of person. And so, I think it was later years I had to reconcile with like, well, yeah, maybe, yeah, glass is half full a lot of the time, but maybe I need to like pause and just make sure that I'm allowing myself to understand the implications even. And I think being married and having my wife come in really, really helped me develop a deeper, richer kind of fullness for walking through difficulty and suffering. But yeah, I think those first few decades was really about forming a theology that I think was the soil that could really plant something really solid in. And so I'm thankful for that. That was really needed. And I think another thing that marked those early decades was a desire to not waste the suffering that I talked about, So I remember an opportunity I had, because you kind of just start to learn that there's other people that have CF, and you kind of start to network a little bit and get to know certain people. There was a young man who I didn't know, but knew someone who knew him. He was in the hospital. He was in his, I think, early 20s. And I mean, our CF, he had his CF and was basically like towards the end of his life. And our lives could not have been any more polar opposite in how we approached our disease. He kind of took the ethos of, you only live once. I'm going to live this life. I don't care how long it is, how short. I'm just going to go for it. And I don't care what I do to my body. So he did everything even a healthy person shouldn't do when it came to substances and abuse and all that kind of a thing. And it just wrecked him. At 22 years old, he's towards the end. So I had the opportunity to go and meet him in the hospital. It was a really unique experience. And I remember talking to him, and I was 18, he was 22, and he'd lived way more life than I had up until that point. And we talked about CF, had some common ground there. And then it got to the point where I was ready to leave. And I just thought, man, I can't leave this guy without asking him about his eternal destiny. So I remember even almost walking out and just said, hey, can I ask you a question, Anthony? His name was Anthony. And I just said, classic evangelistic question. Hey, if you were to die tonight and stand before God, and he said, why should I let you into heaven? What would you say? And so he gave an answer about, I believe heaven and hell are what we make of it here on earth. And, you can live your own hell, you can live your own heaven. And so he kind of gave this answer, and I just said, well, can I tell you what I believe and what the Bible says? And I was able to share the gospel with him, and, really pleaded with him to make a decision about Jesus before his life was through. And so left feeling like, okay, Lord, you gave me that opportunity, and it was because of CF that I was able to have this weighty conversation with this young man. And then 6 months later, I got a call that he had passed. And I mean, it was so sobering to realize, like, man, for me to look at eternity with hope and go, man, yes, Lord, you're going to take me one day. I hope I get to be on this earth as long as possible. Especially I have kids and a wife. But I also want to, expand his kingdom. But then to think of somebody like an Anthony who looked at eternity or what he thought was eternity with despair and with no hope, not having Christ. And it was just really sobering for me. And so I think that's also kind of guided the way that I view difficulty and suffering, wanting to, if the Lord can use me, to speak to people who find themselves in that kind of similar situation.
Yeah. It just as you're talking, thinking about how did God help you, particularly in your situation through this, two things that really stand out to me are, one, that disposition that you said that you have, that glass half full kind of disposition. I think that was part of God's mercy for you. That's not his answer for everyone who is going to have a significant chronic disease. But he did that for you, and what a blessing. Yeah. And then secondly, I know that he put you in a church growing up that was theologically sound.
Yep.
And that helped you because if you have bad theology about God's character or bad theology about evangelism, bad theology about eternity, bad theology about miracles and healing, like bad theology about any of those categories, and you're dealing with cystic fibrosis, it'll mess you up in all sorts of ways. So what a blessing that, he kind of put you in an environment where you get your theological head screwed on right, because I'm sure that was a huge help to you in processing through what this meant as you were dealing with it.
Totally, man. I think it really was. Yeah. And, I think in addition to the theological side, because that I found like when you're talking to someone who just got a cancer diagnosis or, someone who's experiencing the long-term effects of Parkinson's or something like this, a really difficult illness, theology isn't always what they need in that moment. As one pastor puts it, it kind of feels like cold comfort. Like, okay, thank you. But I believe you need that. And I always encourage people, hey, do the theology in the good times so that in those hard times you have something to fall back on. And for me, that's been really important and something I am passionate about. But in those moments, and I think for me, where it became real, where it went from beyond the theology to something even more, was when my sister ended up passing away from CF about 7 years ago. And as I mentioned earlier, her disease was more progressed, and she was nearly on a list to get a double lung transplant. And then, she passed tragically in a night that she was in the hospital 2 days before they released her. And they felt that she was healthy enough to go home and continue progressing at home. But she had an episode and ended up passing. In that moment, I think the weightiness of losing a sister, but also a sister who had the same disease that I have, realizing, oh gosh, this thing, I'm not 15 anymore. I'm not 25 anymore. At that point I was 33, and realizing like, is that what's next? Is that what's inevitable? This is happening. And so just all these different things that came together, that I think I needed to learn. There's a line from a John Mark McMillan song. He's a Christian artist. And he says, I don't have an answer for hurricane or cancer, but a Savior who suffers them with me. And I think that is what I had to learn in those moments where you feel like there's not a verse, there's not a theological truth, but there is a Savior who's present and who's there and can be the good shepherd and can lead you when you feel like, I don't know what's going on. So through grief, through those diagnoses that we get, sometimes that's all we have is just to lean on him. And it was in moments, very real moments I've shared with the church even, where I just felt and heard the Lord speak to me, not in an audible voice, reassuring me that he was good, even through taking my sister to be with him. And so I think that's the big part of it, is Christianity, again, has this distinction that we don't just have answers and philosophically satisfying reasons for why we can see bad in the world and why bad things happen to Christians as much as they happen to non-Christians. But we have at the center of our faith a cross, suffering Savior who said, you may not always understand the why, but we know what it's not. And this is a Kehler thing, right? We know that it can't mean that he doesn't care or that he doesn't love us. Because why the cross then? Why do we have a suffering Savior? That has to at least show us that this side of heaven, we may not answer the why, but we also know it can't mean that he doesn't care. So that's been super helpful to me.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that, especially about your sister's death. And I know that's That's about as tender as it gets and as close to home as it gets for a man. And I'm sure that was a scary moment for you and Bree, your whole family. You're grieving, but you're also frightened. And I was kind of wanting to ask you just about, you mentioned Bree and her willingness to marry you, knowing that you had CF, and I know that she knew even before you guys really became just even an item, really. So that was something that she processed and, thought through and considered. And I'm curious, what are some of the ways that she has helped you? And conversely, what are some of the ways that you have helped her? Because what an interesting thing. I'm sure there's moments where she's feeling the weight of it. She's feeling, uncertain about the future, or scared or frightened about what might happen to you. Yet God is wanting to use you to minister to her in that time that she's afraid. And you have no assurance to be able to say, "Oh, don't worry about it, babe. I guarantee you, I got another 50 years."
Yeah,
like you
that
can't,
doesn't go very far.
Yeah,
totally. Yeah, no, oh man. There's so many things that she has done to help me. The practical, just every day, like, hey, you better do your stuff. You better take care of your body, because if you don't, like, that doesn't just affect you anymore. Don't be selfish, kind of a thing. Yeah. As a single guy, there's this thing of, man, I'm gonna just go hard for the Lord, and I'm gonna do His work as long as I can while I'm here. And God's like, well, you could be here longer if you took ownership of your body that I gave you. And so it kind of took my wife to really come into my life for ownership of my disease to really become what it needed to be. So I'm so grateful for her for that. She's a planner. She's organized. She's disciplined. There's a lot of those things that I'm learning, but I'm thankful that God brought her into my life. So that fact has been so good. I think she's also helped me, be a little bit more nuanced in how I think about difficulty. It hit me years ago when there was something that we both had experienced, like a hardship that wasn't related to my disease that we both experienced. And my muscle memory, or my reflex, was, all right, suffering happens, like sin results in brokenness. Yeah. So how can we cope with this? And I realized for her kind of way of processing with it was first kind of trying to wrestle with, hey, why is this thing even here? Why is this thing even happening? And I think I realized that she thinks on a level even deeper than I do, because of the way that God has made her to be so thoughtful and so forward thinking, that I think it helped me to get even deeper in how I process information. And so that's been really great to even feel things and even go deeper into the implications of our future together. And so that's been really good. I think I don't really know fully how I've helped her. If there is one thing, she knows that I'm more of the optimist, and she knows that, I am going to look at things and try to find, I guess, the silver lining. That's not always encouraging to someone like her in the moment, right. But I think that probably has had a helpful effect in our marriage. Raising children, there's a lot of, you could be doomsday about a lot of things, but I think we balance each other out. And I hope through what God's done in me and what God continues to do. There was even something on the way here. She texted me. We were waiting to hear back on something, and not related to my condition, but the Lord answered a prayer of ours. And it was this really cool thing. And, I just texted back, man, praise the Lord. She said, praise God. I said, He is good, and to me, those things, I I love connecting with the goodness of God, because I think God just gets a bad rap from so many people, like in our world. And there's so many crazy things happening that, man, we need to remember to find praise and find thankfulness and gratitude for the things that he really has his fingerprints on. So.
Well said.
Yeah.
Well said. Well, Matt, before I close us out and wrap up this podcast, are there any last perspectives or encouragements that you would want to give to someone who's listening today, whether they're themselves dealing with chronic disease, perhaps even CF, or have someone in their life that they care for, that they're trying to minister to? Is there anything that you'd like to say as we wrap it up?
Yeah, man, there's so much I think you could say. And I know that, my heart would be to sit down with somebody like we're doing face to face and hear the fears that they have, the concerns, the things that they've had to grieve, maybe the losses that they've experienced, and to just be able to sit with them a little bit, because I think that is probably the most helpful thing I know for me. When there have been seasons in my life, and there's a good friend of mine here that, a few years ago in my disease, there was just some things that I was having a hard time reconciling. And it wasn't reconciling with whether God's good or, my theology, but just practically like, oh man, this is kind of, when you get something lodged in your head and it's just hard to shake it out. It was just lodged in there, and it was producing a fear in my life. And I remember just spending a good hour or two with a friend, and this friend was so helpful to just let me talk and just let me process and not have to have a bunch of answers, but just ask questions that I wasn't asking of myself. And I just kind of needed somebody else. And I was able to cry, and I was able to process, and I'm just so thankful for that kind of friend. And so I would just encourage people to be present with those that are going through difficulty, and be patient. And in some ways, that's one thing that we can do, right? As believers, as brothers and sisters, we can bear each other's burdens. That's kind of a hard work, but man, is there anything more Christ-like than bearing each other's burdens? It's literally, what Jesus did for us on the cross. And so I think if you're observing someone who's going through something, just being willing to maybe slow down and how are you doing? How are you doing with your hope? And because despair is a killer, what's the saying? You can live, 40 days without food, 4 days without water, 2 minutes without air, but you can't live 4 seconds without hope. And so despair, this idea that there's an absence of all hope, it's just something the Bible has so much to say about. Psalm 43, you got the psalmist who's literally just kind of preaching to his own heart, do not give up, do not lose hope, trust in the Lord. And so I would just say to the person who can be an encouragement, to be present, to be there. To the person who's going through this, just remember that we have an eternal weight of glory that is on the other side. Like this isn't all there is. And when you feel the pains and the brokenness and the effects of this fallen world, whether it's through aging or whether it's through an illness or a disease, it's a reminder that we have something better to look forward to. And if you need encouragement, for me, the people that I admire so much are those that have gone through intense suffering, but have just been refined in the furnace of pain. Corrie ten Boom is one of them for me that I just find so much encouragement from. Joni Eareckson Tada, in other words, get anything from those women that you can get your hands on if you're in that place of dealing with chronic pain and illness. But no, you're not alone, I guess. You have a suffering Savior who's there with you. You've got a cloud of witnesses that have come before you. Paul understood what it was like to have a thorn in his flesh. And we know the promise, 2 Corinthians 12:9, that His grace is sufficient.
I love it. That's a great closing word, because I think that human beings can be very resilient if we have just that little bit of source of encouragement or listening ear or someone to help us process things. I mean, human beings can go through a lot, but it's really hard to go through it alone. So it's a beautiful way to close things out. Well, Matt, I'm, as the pastor of the church here, so thankful to God that he brought you and Bree here from the Central Valley, 7 or 8 years ago. And so blessed at the work that you're doing right now in the church, the work that you have done in the church, the way you're leading your wife and your family. So thanks for everything you're doing. And
thanks, man.
We as a church body and family who know you will be praying for you, praying that God continues to give you wisdom in managing your CF, and also great wisdom and breakthroughs to your medical team so that they know how to take care of you. And we'll just be asking God to continue to sustain your physical body so that you can continue to, be what you are in this church community. But thanks again for chatting about this, talking about something that's so personal, and
you bet.
Really appreciate you, man.
We pray that today's discussion has blessed you. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, subscribe, and share so we can continue to reach people and make Jesus famous in our lives and the lives around us. Until next time, God bless.